Yeah. First of all, wow, I'm overwhelmed by the turnout today. Paul does well, actually, the whole Riverside town thing. That's especially does a great job of continually turning out people. I work quite a bit throughout Southern California, and Riverside has always been out here in terms of interest, keeping people passing back and forth information, building networks. It's definitely at the top right there. So I enjoy working with all of you. Just a little bit background about, as Paul mentioned, I'm a retired U.S. diplomat, Foreign Service Officer, State Department, economist. Also worked at times with the Commerce Department, the U.S. Trade Representative. And my emphasis throughout my entire career was on business, trade, finance, all sorts of these activities. And that gave to me this real understanding of, how the world was coming together, how it was growing, how it was, we use the word globalization, and it takes sometimes a pejorative, but it's really meant for a lot of improvements in our lives and improvements in opportunities for all of you, particularly now with the export markets, and big advantages for that. I've been doing these ETAP programs with Paul, I think, since 2012 or something like that, 2011. At any rate, things are, what I was just reflecting back on this morning, things are evolving. And I think you tend to think of international trade as been sort of a very staid kind of business to be in. But it really is, over the last couple of years, it's been evolving very, very rapidly. And that's part of what in terms of my organization, what we brought in. I represent a group called the International Business Accelerator. We're a program of a nonprofit organization above that, both of which I founded. But the International Business Accelerator is focusing on getting companies rapidly into international markets. And what's changed about my sort of approach over time is that really see right now for businesses like yourselves is only getting into the next wave of technologies. And we went through the 1990s, early 2000s. I remember sitting there talking with all kinds of businesses. Well, what's this new internet thing? How do I use a web page? How do I do all these sorts of things? And it took a number of years for small business to come catching up. We're at a similar point right now. And that similar point is what I call the ABCD suite of technologies. It's artificial intelligence, blockchain, which will be used extensively in global business and logistics over the next couple of years, cloud computing, and the D is for 3D printing. And those are the things that are going to rapidly change the whole landscape of what you as manufacturers, you as service companies, you as people developing products for the global market are going to face. So the International Business Accelerator approach is that we work with companies in cohorts. We've run them at Long Beach City College, LAX Coastal Chamber. We ran one last fall at USC at blockchain technologies. But the whole point there is by working together in groups that you can then learn the processes to go global. As I say, it's complicated, but it's not complex, okay? And so you can do a lot of these kinds of things that are really carrying forth right now. Just talking about somewhere we're going, just talking about you as the gentleman there with the LA County Business Business Commission, Small Business Commission. I happened to have been the last couple days, and the data for LA is very similar to what it is throughout the entire region there. We're working on a big proposal due Monday for Cal State Dominguez Hills, with Cal State Dominguez Hills, where we're focusing on how do we take these ABCD technologies, add into global markets so that people can go ahead and really take advantage. Because what's happening with, we call it ABCD plus E, E for export. So what we're really focusing on in that case is to get businesses prepared for the next wave, to integrate into their business processes and to go forth into global markets. Small business manufacturers, service companies have been, under tremendous amount of pressure and competitive pressures here in this market. There's no doubt about it. It's an expensive place to be. We are very competitive. We are still the manufacturing center of the United States, Southern California. Okay, and but what we have to do is we have to be able to shift for all of these. Just a final thing, my International Business Accelerator, one of the things that we do focus on is that we're pretty sector agnostic. See, we deal with blockchain, and we also deal with very traditional companies and so forth. So it's a process. I want to share some of the things, how we do it, how we develop the companies in terms of their business planning. Because that's the first step, and that's what I wanted to talk with you today. It's about your international business plan. That's your first step. You got to figure out where you're going. And these are just some of the first steps, first ideas for you to think about as you're going through this process. Which one is it? There we go. I got it. All right. I don't have to give you too much of a pep talk on why to go global. I will say that there is going to be, we're right now going through a global slowdown. The other countries are slowing in their growth. The United States has so far been immune to that. We seem to have done pretty well in terms of our GDP numbers for the last quarter. Information came out today. Me being the economist, I'm always looking for, they call it the dismal profession, so we're always looking for bad news. At some point or another, we're not, as Jerome Powell says, they have not abolished the business cycle. So at some point, you're going to do this. Why have this? Why? So you can broaden your markets, broaden your base so that you are not a victim locked into any one particular market. We found that a lot in the last recession. A lot of companies were just really focused on the U.S. market, which was go, 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 and then it stopped. And then they were left saying, what do we do from here? The second thing is one of the things about our International Business Accelerator, our concept is the earlier you get yourself into these markets, the better. And it's a mentality thing. You have to consider yourself as a global company. You're not thinking of yourself as a company in Riverside that happens to export. You've got to do all of your operations as you're thinking of yourself as a global company. Our premise is that if you think of yourself as a global company, that you will start off differently, you will develop different kinds of products, you will hire different kinds of people, you will grow your operations differently. And so that's the first step, is thinking of yourself as this international company. The earlier you do that, the better. There's plenty of information. You'll get this from, particularly from our folks at the Department of Commerce. When they talk about their numbers, the exporting companies do better. They grow more rapidly, they hire more people, they have higher profit margins. So that's just a bit of background. I think you all recognize that. I always do this analogy before we start getting it. It's global business like playing 3D chess. Okay, on the one hand, you have the traditional chessboard, which is our American business, the way we do business in the United States. You have our laws on the one side, and on the other side, you have our business culture. You know the moves. You know how to go from one to the other, and you're pretty sophisticated in that. But when you go into the international realm, you have a different set of laws, and you have a different business culture. You can figure out the moves, and you have to figure out going from one to the other. You can figure it out. You just have to sit down and think about it. It's less reflexive and more intentional, particularly in terms of planning. That's why doing this module really up front on international business planning. The first thing is you got to get yourself ready internally. One of the things we've added, particularly based on our experience with the blockchain companies, this whole concept is the data room. You've got to have all of your business information together in one place. your articles of incorporation, your financial results, your plans, and so forth, all that. Put it in some place or another. Start it in a Dropbox. Box is good because it's encrypted and so forth. That's information then, if you have somebody you can share specific files with your customers, bankers, whomever it is who needs that information. You got to review your online presence. Yes, all of you do have an online presence, and that's what makes you a global company. Even these people don't think of themselves as global. As soon as you're online, you have global presence. So you have to look at what your presence is in terms of the web, your social media. What's the image that you're doing? You got to look at your systems. Are they really up to date? IT, HR, etc. You got to look at your processes and your suppliers. Those will change as you go international. And lastly, it's identify resources. That's why you're here today. You're finding out resources, you're making connections, and that's where we're going to be. That's the advantage of this particular workshop today. Step 2. I said that it was a combination of business, of laws and culture. Well, the culture is an area that you got to think about intentionally, and maybe we tend to gloss it over when we're talking about international business. I teach international business at Golden Gate University, but it really is, it's understanding. It's easier for us in Southern California. We are a very diverse group of people in this region. That's our strength, okay? It really is a tremendous asset, the amount of diversity that we have. We have people who are able to understand any kind of markets around the world because of their own personal experience, and that adds to that great mix. But for us, for all of these, it's understanding how the consumer, your end customer, makes a decision in the international market, the other market. Not how you would make them, not how the U.S. customer would make them, but how they would make them. What are the factors that are doing them? And that's a bit of psychology there. I have a great reference that I look at, and I usually keep one book on my reference books, the bookshelf these days, because we don't keep books anymore. But it's called Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands, and it's about a guide to doing business in 60 countries. Okay, it's a great little thing. It talks to you about social, cultural norms, business practices, negotiating strategies, and so forth. I've worked in or lived in probably about 20 or 30 of those countries of 60. I find what they have is spot on. I quibble with little things here and there, but when you're about to do business with another country, this is a great thing just to pull it off the bookshelf, say, hey, what is it, if you are dealing with Cambodia, what makes Cambodia, their business culture, unique? Okay, so it's a great little reference thing. Lastly, you have to understand how to negotiate in other cultural contexts. I have a great little thing on negotiating, a little module that we do at times. It's fun, but it forces you to think through how, when you're negotiating, do that. Next, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be doing a little bit more in these areas, give you a framework on how that will go forward. But that's a big proponent area. That's an area, that's my fun area, and but it's one that's essential, step 2, when you're going forward. Number 3, and a lot of this is the market research. I'll leave that to Robert Cronin later on. He's has a great experience in this area, but there are some basic things you have to do. You have to, and there are people out there who can help you do that. Lots of the logistics companies today have online resources that help you do this. It's not as complicated as it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. Things are getting better because of the things like artificial intelligence and cloud computing and so forth. Okay, you have to identify what are the tariffs, taxes, and trade barriers. In other words, you have to figure out what is it going to do? What's the tariff? Any sort of trade barriers up there? Some places have quotas. Some places have other kinds of testing requirements. The South Koreans, for example, have a lot of testing requirements for US autos. One of the reasons why we don't get very many autos into South Korea, that's recently been changed in the most recent renegotiation of the Korea Free Trade Agreement. You have to look at their standards and labeling requirements. It's their country, it's their laws, it's their way of doing things, you've got to comply. But you've got to know what they are. There's lots and lots of experts in this region who can help you identify that specific one. As I also mentioned too, logistics companies have a lot of this information already on hand. I know when I was working with DHL down at just looking at their headquarters near LAX, you know, they have they have one woman who does nothing but deal with Italy, and another one with Vietnam, you know, and so they know these things pretty specifically. In addition, there's the U.S. Commercial Service, and also through the SBA, they can get you in touch with people on the ground or real experts on this particular area. Lots and lots of resources. Logistics partners, key one there, you know, to get things, you know, through either the ports or through the airport and so forth. You know, that's certainly the kinds of people that work with Norm, that they understand how to do that. So all this comes down to the final thing is, how competitive is your product in the other market? And you got to figure out broadly where'd you come in. You may be in the United States market a low cost, the value producer, okay? But when you're in the other markets, because of the tariffs, the shippings, the other things, you may find yourself at the higher end of the pricing. What's that do? Does that mean you're shut out? Not necessarily. You can start figuring out how to do your marketing, how to change your brand competitive. You shift yourself to a quality kind of argument there. That Made in USA, as Norm pointed out, is huge. It is such a huge marketing thing. I don't think, you know, whether you're doing products or services or whatever, that's one of your best assets. And if you say Made in California, USA, it's even more powerful. The world looks at this, okay? They understand that there's something special going on in this area, and it's worth paying a premium for. So all of this is coming down to, based on your market research, you've got to figure out where you come in the markets you're looking at in terms of this leads into your marketing strategy. But first of all, you've got to know what your price is, you got to know what you are compared to competitors, and then you can start figuring out your marketing strategy. You lay on top of that, and I mentioned the other part of my little chessboard is the legal side. You have to understand that, both the U.S. and the global side. You have to have different kinds of contracts. Your standard U.S. contract, a sales contract, is not going to be sufficient. You're going to have things in there talking about what happens if things are, there's a problem, if there's a default, or if there is a dispute. How do you handle it? You know, I think probably the last thing one of my countries I was in El Salvador, and it had a great, it had a lot of things on paper, but its court system at the time, it's then shifted to it, was what's very typical for a lot of Latin American, actually for a lot of global countries, that everything was dependent upon written arguments, not oral arguments when you got into court. So you talk about courts being slow here, it's really slow there. It's, you know, mountains and reams of papers and so forth. And, you know, even at that, there were problems how you resolve things. One of my, Paul's heard this story before, but when I was down there in El Salvador, the McDonald's franchise owner lost his license. I mean, the food there was just horrible, to be honest. And it was definitely an embarrassment to them, so they took it away. And he said, I don't care, this is El Salvador, I don't have to live by your regulations and so forth. And he actually admitted that to me. He says, you know, I'm just going to rip off their thing. And that put me in a spot then as a U.S. government official. Well, I got to do something. So I called up McDonald's and said, do you want some help here? And they said, yeah. And so we took it in, we put in, we finally put in a lot of pressure on the Salvadoran government. However, just as I was leaving the country, they somehow, because of his political influence, was able to get in and to put a suit against me and a whole bunch of other people for interference with his business. And there was actually, just shortly after I left, an indictment out for me. So I guess if I go back to El Salvador and visit, I have to worry about being arrested at the place. But the point is the contracts. How do you deal with a situation coming up with that, where your name, your intellectual properties we talked about there is ripped off, your ideas are ripped off, and so on. These are all part of that contract strategy. There's a tax strategy, and it doesn't get talked about a lot. Value-added taxes. That's one of the big areas where small first-time exporters really get tripped up. Okay? Because you're responsible for collecting the first round of value-added taxes. So if you're selling into Europe, you're saying something, say, is $45 a unit, you're going to have to do the $45 a unit plus whatever the value-added tax is, 20% in parts of that. So that's an additional $9. So if you sell it at $45, they're going to come after you for the $9, and suddenly your margin's down to 36. Okay, because they come after you. So you have to do that. There's implications for U.S. Strategy. Fortunately, the most recent revision to the tax laws does give a lot of new tools to exporters in terms of what they can, write off and the allowances they can take. It makes it a lot easier, a lot advantageous to do exporting. Lots of legal and ethical tripwires. There's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. If you are asked for a bribe and you give a bribe, then, or even one of your employees or your agents does it, you as the business owner are technically liable. You could go to jail. People do go to jail for those things. Okay? Not a big one. You have to understand it. Ditto with a lot of those if you are involved in technology areas. The export control regulations. Okay, you export those unwittingly to somebody who is not completing the paperwork or selling to a prohibited person, something that's sort of been obscured by your thing. Hey, this is this great deal I've got coming in from this person. You're going to make a lot of money off of it. Sorry, but you're also liable for that, and including criminally liable. Okay, so you got to know those kinds of things. Lastly, in terms of building teams, is building cross-cultural teams. We're in Southern California. We know how to do that. Okay, we know how to build the kind of resources that we have. So that's what I'm talking about. Step 4, talking about these legal and HR issues. We get to finally to our next to last, but a marketing, sales, and market entry plan. So again, this comes back some of the things that Robert will be talking later on. It's about you have to know your markets, and you have to develop a market plan, including your market entry, your sales plan. You have to review your operations and come up with a coherent plan, how it is you're going to work with this particular market. Now, a lot of times when you're first starting off, you have to do catch as catch can, and and go for that. But as you expand, as you go into other markets, being more intentional. That's what I'm talking about with global business, is being intentional about your plans, your progress, and so forth. Customer satisfaction. Well, we're doing that in different countries, but that's one thing that remains universal. You want to keep your customers satisfied and happy. You want to figure out, what are they expecting in terms of service to your product, how you're going to handle disputes. If you have, for example, a number to call about a product issue, well, are you going to have somebody, if you're dealing with somebody, in China or in Vietnam or India, 12 hours off of us, are you going to have somebody in the middle of the night to answer a phone call? Is it necessary to have that? What are you going to do to have that kind of customer service? So these are kinds of things you're going to have to think about. It may not be in your first sale. It may be as you develop markets further, it may be as you add markets. But you have to be intentional again about how is it you're going to keep your customers satisfied. And when there are problems, as there always are, how you're going to respond to them. Remember too, we have social media, a tweet or a comment on a website, a product review site is there, okay? And it's hard to get those off of your record. So thinking about doing it right the first time is better than having to make up for mistakes. And lastly, it's a financial strategy. First of all, you have to have a good banking partner, okay? It may be that your bank that you're dealing with doesn't have the international reach. It could be that the bank that you have says international reach, but doesn't have expertise in that part of the world which you're focusing on. Norm mentioned that a lot of the growth areas are in Africa at this point. And what's happening in Africa, particularly East Africa at this point, is being one of the fastest growing regions in the world. Why? Because that little mini computer holding in your hand. People can communicate for the first time. They can make micro payments. They can do banking services and so forth. You need to have somebody on your side who understands that market, who can do operations into that market. So a good banking good banker, international banker is your best, is one of your needed partners as you go forward. Coming along with that, foreign exchange strategy. Will they be talking about that? Oh, yes. Foreign exchange strategy. A lot of complex things there. I guess the short term, my only words are, short term you can hedge, long term you got to plan for things going badly. That's the only thing I can say to protect yourself. There's not a lot you can do to talk about where foreign exchange will be. Your trade finance, and there is great partners, not only through the SBA, Ex-Im Bank, and so forth. SBA has some great programs there to take care of your finance needs from beginning to end. If you are smart about it, and this is an area that you want to do, you can set up your finance transactions, including insurance programs like from the Ex-Im Bank and so forth. You can lay off 95% of the risk in a transaction, which means it's going to be safer to send to Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia than it would be to send a shipment to San Bernardino, okay? Because you can lay off 95%. Okay? That makes things different. You can maybe do some open account operations, or you can do just minimal down payments and so forth like that. That really is an area if you structure it, and there are costs to structuring it that, but it is a way that you can reduce risk. The federal government has set things up like that in order to incentivize you to do what you're going to do here today, which is to go global, to export. So they're really reducing the risk. These are programs that are not available to the traditional exporters, which is why I really include, when we're talking about strategies going forward with particular areas, it's always technology, it's this export market, because there are things available there that are not available to other kinds of manufacturers, service companies, whatever it is. And lastly, you have to have a growth strategy, debt, equity, what kind of partners you have, and so forth with that. That's a rapidly evolving thing. I think I just have one more thing. I'm here for the questions. The first hand goes up.